I don't agree with Fiducia Supplicans, but they're trying to hold on to the doctrinal and the pastoral, but eventually since the approach of Francis and of Cardinal Fernandez is a pragmatic approach, and there's a kind of an anti-dogmatic tendency, and there's a sort of a built-in historicism and a kind of an anti-realism about doctrinal and the way the scriptures are read, and so on and so on. Again, this document, in my view, was totally unessential.
Okay, everyone. Welcome again to the Kirkwood Center podcast for Theology and Ethics. My name is Anthony Costello, and today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Dr. Eduardo Echeverria, who is a professor of systematic theology at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in beautiful Detroit, Michigan. Ed, welcome again.
Thanks
to
a lot.
the podcast.
Thanks
It's
a lot,
good
Anthony. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. And, today we're going to be looking very closely at the document that was released December 18 of last year, Fiducia Supplicans. It was released by the Vatican, which pertains to the nature of priestly blessings, especially for couples in irregular situations. Same-sex couples especially are in view here, and this has been very controversial in the Catholic Church, and not just the Catholic Church. It's actually, I'd say, for our instance, it's a much bigger issue than just what's going on in the Roman Catholic Church. We see parallels like this in Protestant churches and in the Anglican Church, of course, as well. So I wanted to have Ed on because he is truly an expert in Catholic doctrine and understands the Vatican well, and understands has written 2 editions of a book now on Pope Francis, right, and his papacy, which we'll link to. So Ed, let's get right into it. Maybe the first thing we should start with is sort of a timeline of events. Give us sort of the background from leading up to Fiducia Supplicans, the December 18th document. Let's go from there.
Okay, well, let me just say this regarding the release of this document from the what was formerly called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, is now called the Dicastery, and the prefect, who before he was Benedict XVI was Cardinal Ratzinger, Joseph Ratzinger, but there was some questioning of why release this document at around Christmas time, 7 days before Christmas. It's kind of like distracting from the Christmas season, as it were. Okay, I would say 2 things just as a preface to the document, the language that the document uses. I consider the term irregular relationships to be like a euphemism. It's like people who talk about abortion as healthcare, or
right, yeah,
or abortion as reproductive health and blah blah blah. No, when they're talking about irregular relationships, cohabitation, whether homosexual, heterosexual,
polygamous.
Polygamous, but they're not talking about polygamy. They're talking about particularly about relationships of that's also problematic, whether it's remember, there's that's part of the timeline was that the distinction between couples and unions, and
Right.
But the point is that to me, cohabiting relationships are, and I've written about this, morally and spiritually problematic relationships. Now, the thing about the if you were to challenge, the Cardinal Fernandez, who's the prefect, he'd probably say, well, we can't assume that these people are in a state of, objectively speaking, in a state of sin, or even if it's objectively speaking, a state of sin, maybe subjectively there are mitigating circumstances that allow you to say that they, in that sense, personally are not in state of sin. They don't. That's not actually talked about as such. It is referred to in the document, but so to me, the term irregular relationships is a euphemism, and so I consider those relationships as such spiritually and morally problematic.
So Ed, when you say it's a euphemism, when people talk about abortion as like women's rights or reproductive rights, there's like a linguistic, psychological reason for doing that. It's to sort of soften.
Right. So this is also
actually is the problem.
Yes, because the claim is you speak of irregular relationships because you don't want to imply or explicitly state that this is in fact a mortal sin, some serious sin. You see,
it's thin, watery language instead of thick, heavy language.
And it doesn't really get at the reality. That's why I wrote an article a few years ago, is also translated into Dutch, on pastoral care of spiritually and morally problematic relationships. At the very least, you can say that cohabitation is a spiritually and morally problematic situation.
Relationship. Yeah, and God forbid we say like corrupt or something.
Right.
Then
the other thing is, I don't think there was a need for this document.
Yeah, I've seen that. Okay, explain that. I've seen others say that as well. Yeah.
In that document, the original document from the previous prefect for the then called the Congregation for Doctrine of Faith, Laudario, he was a Spanish. He was appointed by Francis. Luis Cardinal Laudario is a Spanish priest, theologian, but he says in that document, which was published, when is it? Oh yes, the 22nd of February 2021.
Right.
And that document explicitly addressed the question regarding a dubium, that is, a question was raised regarding the blessing of the union of persons of the same sex. Okay, and the document, this document concluded, no, you can't bless same-sex unions. But here's where it says, and this is why I say there was no need for this document. Suppose you're struggling with same-sex attraction, or suppose you're struggling with sexual sin, etc. And you go, well, go to the pastor, you knock on the door of the pastor, and you say, Father, I'd like to talk to you about this. And at the end of the conversation, you say, Father, could you give me a blessing? Because I really want to serve the Lord. I really want to do the right thing. Okay, that's what it says here.
Yeah.
The answer to the proposed dubium does not preclude the blessings given to individual persons with same-sex attraction.
Yeah.
Who manifest the will to live in fidelity to the revealed plans of God as proposed by church teaching. Rather, it says, it declares illicit any form of blessing that tends to acknowledge their unions as such. In that case, in fact, the blessing would manifest not the intention to entrust such individual persons to the protection and help of God, but to approve and encourage a choice in a way of life that cannot be recognized as objectively ordered to the revealed plans of God. So there was no need for this document.
Yeah.
And in fact, what's his name? The cardinal, the prefect, he recognized that. He recognized that at the beginning of his address, because he says we had to do something, because the document, the 2021 document, was he uses not accurate language, but it was rejected. People didn't accept it, you see.
That's what Fernandez says at the beginning of Fiducia.
Yeah, that's right. So he had to find, okay, he says, this is in paragraph 3, the above mentioned responsum, so the document from Laudario, elicited numerous and varied reactions. Some welcomed the clarity of the document and its consistency with the Church's perennial teaching. Others did not share the negative response it gave to the question whether same-sex unions could be blessed.
Right.
They did not consider the formulation of its answer and the reasons provided in the attached explanatory note to be sufficiently clear. To meet the latter reaction, so now this is what's his face? Fernandez saying,
yeah,
to meet the negative reaction with fraternal charity, it seems opportune to take up the theme again and offer a vision that draws together the doctrinal aspects with the pastoral ones in a coherent manner. So what he's saying, well, people didn't accept it. They thought it was too negative. It didn't allow for the blessings of same-sex unions, couples, etc.
People in the unions.
Yeah, so we had to find a way, to deal with it. And of course, the intent is to show a consistency, as it were, that there isn't really a contradiction between the doctrine, so historic Christian teaching about marriage, that it's about permanence, it's about
sexual differentiation.
Sexual differentiation, the two in one, Jesus refers us back to Genesis 1:27, God created man in his image, male and female, therefore a man shall leave his mother and his father and cleave unto his wife. And the two, well, which two? Obviously the two referring back to male and female shall become one flesh. He says this here, he says it in the repeat statement. So January 4th. So
right. So this was what they call it? The explanation to
press release concerning the reception of Fiducia Supplicans. We were writing this press release to help clarify the reception of Fiducia Supplicans while recommending at the same time a full and calm reading. It's so condescending. Okay, you mean the people who are reacting to this negatively, who reject it? They haven't read.
Yeah, they're temperamental, irrational.
Yeah, that's right. They're not.
Yeah, I know.
Calmly
right.
read it.
Yeah.
So as to better understand its meaning and purpose. I haven't yet read, except for those people who have a kind of hyper-papalist view, who treat the Pope as a kind of absolute monarch, and so that everything, well, they don't make distinctions in terms of the kind of teaching it is, and whether it's infallible teaching. They don't make distinctions between the doctrine, the dogma, and pastoral judgments, and so on. The problem is, of course, as what's his name says, as the prefect says, the document is a declaration.
Yes.
So it's not just like a responsum from Laudario, the previous 2021 document.
Right.
It's a declaration, and so it has more authority.
It's got authoritative weight, right?
Yes, exactly. So then, but there hasn't been other than the to me, hyper-papalist. They don't think you can ask critical questions of the Pope and so on and so on.
Right.
And so everything that the Pope says is somehow has to be, you have to embrace and blah blah blah. But other than those folk, I haven't read a positive reaction to this.
Right. Well, can I ask you a question about some of the hyper-papalists you might be thinking of? Were these people, if they were around at the time, also hyper-papalists during Benedict XVI's papacy? Or are they just sort of hyper-papalists now?
Well, I would say, look,
I mean, I
John,
could see somebody being a hyper-papalist and saying, regardless of who's in there, I'm, but I could see some people are just
okay,
when somebody gets in there that shares
right.
their
Well, but
sensibilities.
I would say this for John Paul II, for 27 years Pope, doesn't mean everything that he did in practice I agreed with. So, for instance, well, even before I say for instance, but it doesn't mean, but the foundation, the very structure, the theological articulated foundation, the Pope wrote, aside from pre-papal writings, John Paul II wrote about 13 encyclicals. He also wrote apostolic exhortations, apostolic letters, and so on and so on. In 1975, the Pope called an extraordinary synod regarding the reception of the Second Vatican Council. And it provided, the most important thing about that was that it provided principles for reading Vatican II documents.
Mm-hmm.
And it so happens that one of the principles was that you can't oppose or set up in opposition to each other the doctrinal, the dogmatic, and the pastoral.
Mm-hmm.
So Benedict XVI also, pre-papal writings, his own writings, doesn't mean you agreed with everything, but what you knew, there was just an articulation of the foundations of the Christian faith, or the Catholic faith, and so on. So people, they trusted him.
Right. Yeah.
That didn't mean that they disagreed. That didn't mean, like, for instance,
they agreed with everything, but there was.
I don't know why John Paul II felt the impulse to kiss the Quran at some point when he landed. But you know what? I say to people, he also kissed the earth. That didn't make him a pagan or a paganist or a pantheist.
Right. Yes, that's right.
He was showing some measure of respect and
for the creation. That. Yeah.
You know, there was also, and I've written about this, there was also the Assisi meeting in Rome, where he invited all of these representatives of religious tradition.
Yes, I remember that. Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And of course, he wrote about this. He laid out the theological rationale, and it had nothing to do, despite the appearance to the contrary, it had nothing to do with religious relativism. John Paul II never thought that all religions were equally vehicles of salvation, and he didn't think they were all equally true, and so on and so on. However, the thing with Francis is, when I wrote the first edition of my Francis book, Pope Francis, The Legacy of Vatican II, I know people will think this is, well, who are you? But I was trying to connect Francis to the legacy of Vatican II, to the writings of John Paul, to the writings of Benedict, and so on. I think his apostolic...
and that first edition was 2015.
That's right.
I know I read that first edition, and now I have the second. And
right, when he wrote, when Francis wrote the apostolic exhortation Evangelii Gaudium,
right,
I think that's a good document. That doesn't mean that there aren't things in it that I have. There are questions that one can raise, but as such, it was a good document. But over time, again, not that there weren't good things that he did and so on, but over time it seemed to me that he theologically and so on, he was unsavable.
Who's that?
Francis.
Yeah.
And so then I wrote an expanded, a revised edition. I got rid of a couple of chapters from the first edition. Then we have this kind of document on why was it necessary? Why was it necessary?
I want to put that. Your second edition was 2019?
Yes, 2019. Same publisher of 2019. It was.
So you've felt there's the writings on the wall at that point.
Well, at that point, I knew what the writings on the wall.
You knew what the writing was on the wall.
In my view, I mean, this is not about Francis, so I'd rather talk about Fiducia Supplicans. But yeah, no, there were many things that just seemed to me to be problematic in subsequent writings and in the way he.
And we talked about that. The last one we did, we talked about several of the things that, Francis says.
Right. His view of truth and so on.
Okay.
But
well, let's get then. Yeah.
Back to the
let's get then to Fiducia.
Right. So then the big question, the question is that it starts with. So having said, to me, in my view, the document was not necessary. I consider it a document that's pandering to, I mean, what if you had a group of people who said, well, we don't accept that Christ is the full and sufficient cause of our salvation, and we're upset when a document is issued that actually considers that to be, infallible teaching, but that's excluding us. We think that all religions are equally vehicles of salvation and so on. Are you going to write what are you going to do there? What are you going to do? So it seems to me the document is unnecessary. The 2021 document by Laudario already accounted for the blessings of individuals. As I said to you, you come to the pastor's office and you want to talk about your same-sex attraction. You don't come into the office with the man that you're attracted to holding hands with him.
Well, no. Right, and we can get into some of the what has happened since.
Well, some of the people, Father James Martin,
immediately jumped.
Immediately, and what did he do? He takes a photo. He does the very thing that the document says you shouldn't do. Take a photo. It's in church. It's on the altar, and so on and so on. The very thing that the document said you should not do. Father Francis Martin, and I'm sure other.
And I'm sure there's ecclesial discipline coming.
Oh no,
not at all. Yeah, no.
No, because you have some that don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
So yes, that first, in fact, that's the title of the subtitle of on the pastoral meaning of blessings.
Right. Okay. And so talk about the priestly blessing. This is important again. What does that mean in the context of Roman Catholic theology, the priestly blessing?
Well, a blessing is considered a sacramental. It's not a sacrament, but it's a sacramental. Sacramentals have been established as a kind of imitation of the sacraments. Blessings are signs, above all, of spiritual effects that are achieved through the Church's intercession. Now, the question is, whether blessings as such are liturgical actions. And what's his face? The prefect is making a distinction between
liturgical and ordinary, I think was the
liturgical
or simple,
liturgical, non-liturgical,
simple blessings.
I think the Roman ritual states that blessings belong to the category of the sacramentals, whereby the Church calls us to praise God, encourages us to implore his protection, and exhorts us to seek his mercy by our holiness of life. The response of Laudario also says that sacramentals are, quote, among the liturgical actions of the Church. Blessings are thus liturgical actions by their very nature.
I think Cardinal Sarah made that same point. He's like, a blessing is a blessing. It is liturgical.
It's a liturgical action, or it's a priestly action. It's an ecclesial action.
Yeah.
And so the Fiducia Supplicans, the cardinal, the prefect, is saying, oh, well, we have an innovative.
He used that word innovative in one of the early paragraphs. I was like,
a real development, he says, about what has been said about blessings in the magisterium and the official text of the Church. And so, there's no evidence. See, this is who am I? I mean, he's the prefect. But the fact is, for there to be a doctrinal development, there has to be something that's being developed. And he's distinguishing two categories of blessing, and so there's really no ground for a pastoral blessing that is allegedly non-liturgical, non-ecclesial,
non-sacramental.
Yeah. So this is
well, and I might add, and I don't know if you disagree, but when I was reading Fiducia, I was in one of the commentaries on, I can't, who was that? Sarna. It was Sarna's commentary. Nahum Sarna is the JPS. But this is when Isaac blesses Jacob instead of Esau, right? When Isaac blesses Jacob instead of Esau.
Right.
And Sarna's making the point, the blessing can't be undone because there's a spiritual act has been done here. It can't just be taken back, right?
Right.
And maybe that's also something to point out, because these blessings aren't just words.
No.
They're not just words.
They're efficacious.
They're not just nice words that we say.
No.
Well, these are prayers. Yeah.
Here's another thing. I just one more point about the whole question of when he says it's an innovative contribution to real development. In the January 4th clarification, he again brings us back to, in fourth section, the real novelty of the doctrine of the document, blessing couples in irregular situations. So again, irregular situations, in my view, is a euphemism for spiritually immoral problematic relationships.
Yeah.
It is the invitation to distinguish between two different forms of blessings, as we said, liturgical or ritualized, and spontaneous or pastoral. The presentation clearly explains that the value of the document is that it offers a specific and innovative contribution to the pastoral meaning of blessings, permitting a broadening and enrichment of the classical understanding of blessings, which is closely linked to a liturgical perspective. This theological reflection, see, does it go back in time? No, it goes back to the vision of Pope Francis, he says. This theological reflection based on the pastoral vision of Pope Francis implies a real development from what has been said about blessings in the magisterium and the official text of the church. So, in my view, that doesn't provide a sufficient account of what constitutes a legitimate development, an authentic development, as opposed to an inauthentic one.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Here's another thing. When it talks about blessings, the responsum, so that's the response of Laudario, the previous prefect for the Congregation of Doctrine and Faith, he says this regarding the blessing of human relationships. Consequently, in order to conform with the nature of sacramentals, when a blessing is invoked on particular human relationships, in addition to the right intention of those who participate, well, we're not allowed to know what those intentions are according to the document.
Yeah. You're not supposed to. I forget the language. You're not supposed.
No, you're not supposed to ask. There's no moral penetration. No,
right. You're not supposed to interrogate the person exhaustively about
it is necessary that what is blessed be objectively and positively ordered to receive and express grace, according to the designs of God described in creation and fully revealed by Christ the Lord. For this reason, it is not licit to impart a blessing on relationships or partnerships, even stable, that invoke sexual activity outside of marriage, as is the case of the unions between persons of the same sex. Now, so
Laudario. That
was Laudario. However,
well, and I'll read a quote here from Ratzinger's. This is a 1986 letter that Ratzinger wrote, and I quote, "We wish to make it clear that departure from the church's teaching or silence about it in an effort to provide pastoral care is neither caring nor pastoral."
That's it. That's
the true can ultimately be pastoral.
That's right.
The neglect of the church's position prevents homosexual men and women from receiving the care they need and deserve. End quote. Ratzinger.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and that's the stumbling block for many people. So there's where you have, Fernandez, the prefect of the Dicastery now called, who then says, "Oh no." And admittedly, that's in the document. We're not blessing, we're not legitimizing these unions. We're not legitimizing sexual activity outside of marriage, et cetera, et cetera. We're not doing any of that, he says. So he went from unions, so the blessing of unions, to the blessing of couples. That, to me, that's a distinction without a difference.
People in the unions.
Yeah, that's it. But the fact is,
one of the Anglican priests I had on, Ian Paul, because they're dealing with the same exact thing in the Anglican church, and they've came up with these prayers of love and faith, which is basically the same thing. And I think Ian Paul, and he called it salami slicing. You're trying to,
well, it's double talk. It's double talk. It's double talk.
Close as possible to.
The fact is, a couple.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's use the term couple. But a couple means where two people, there's a reciprocity where two people become a we.
Yeah, they bear the property of being in union.
Exactly, which is we. Where this is one of course, I always use the example when to a man, a man and a woman are going out and so on, and the man wants to give a toast to us, and the woman doesn't want to. It's obvious that she doesn't want to make that toast because that assumes reciprocity. It assumes we, that
Oneness,
it's us.
Yeah.
Call it so it seems to me that this is a distinction, and many have said this. The central claim of FS, this is from the interview of Father Jerry. The central claim of Fiducia Supplicans is that it is possible to bless with a pastoral blessing couples in irregular situations and same-sex couples. How is it possible to bless a couple without blessing their completeness? It is impossible to bless a couple without blessing the relationship that constitutes the two persons as a couple. To claim otherwise is an exercise in double talk. Here's the other thing, is that, again, the term couple is a word that the church has only applied to a man and a woman who are married or who are contemplating marriage. For instance, the 17 times the word couple is used in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it refers to a married couple.
Right. Yeah.
Discarding that specification is a fundamental error of Fiducia Supplicans.
I mean, I think there was some language in the document. Again, I read it a few months ago and I haven't returned to it. But okay, and this would just be a very practical case. Two men in a relationship, come up to the one, and one of the partners just contracted cancer or something, and or they've hit some financial turmoil. They just lost both their jobs and their house, and they come to the priest, pray for us, Father, can we receive a blessing? We're going through hard times. My partner just contracted cancer, and we've lost our house, and so on and so forth. Asking for some kind of blessing over the situation that they're in that isn't directly related to their same-sex sexual union.
Well, if I was a priest, what I'd do? I would bless them individually.
Yeah.
And the fact is, that kind of situation is rare, I would say. You can't make good pastoral practice, pastoral principles, when if you're considering the most extreme situations.
And every single possible kind,
right?
Like
the culture that we live in,
the
culture that we live in embraces, doesn't merely, in that document of when Ratzinger was the prefect in 2003, considerations regarding legal proposals to give legal recognition to unions between homosexual persons.
Right.
In paragraph 5 of that document, it distinguishes between merely tolerating the phenomena of homosexual relationships being civil authorities is talking about what kind of position can civil authorities adopt here. Well, it could be you're tolerating the phenomenon. On the other hand, it says, at other times, civil authorities advocate legal recognition of such unions under the pretext of avoiding, with regard to certain rights, discrimination against persons who live with someone of the same sex. And then thirdly, it says, in other cases, they favor giving homosexual unions legal equivalence to marriage, along with the legal possibility of adopting children. So you can have three different stances. You can merely tolerate it. You can be an advocate for it, and you can, in fact, favor giving such relationships, even if you recognize that that it's not the same thing as marriage. You still want to give the kind of recognition that maintains that there's a legal equivalence to marriage, properly so called, and along with the legal possibility of adopting children. Now, I bring this up because even though I don't question that Fernandez says all the right things with respect to the doctrine of marriage and so on.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, it's in there, right?
Right. My problem is, and I usually don't post things on Facebook, but I did post something yesterday because the Pope has said in this new book of his, autobiography, whatever, he says...
Oh, he's got a new book out. The Pope has...
Yeah, he's got a new book out. The Pope does.
Okay.
But in that book, he says that homosexuals should be allowed to live the gift of love legally. I wrote, Francis states that with legal support, homosexuals should be able to live the gift of love. Thus, can he hold, as the Catechism of the Catholic Church holds, that homosexual love is a disordered form of love? I don't think any Christian, well, I know there are Christians that deny that, but homosexual love is a disordered form of love. It's an offense against chastity, the Catechism says. It's against the integrity of the person, because body soul unity, right, and of the integrality of the gift of self, which involves the body, which of course presupposes sexual differentiation of male and female, and hence not only is it incompatible, inconsistent with the natural law, it's not possible that it can be oriented to God.
And it also seems very inconsistent with what I just read from Ratzinger here in 86.
Right, exactly.
2003.
The other thing, so here comes this other matter. And that is that, they say all this, but I wrote also on a Facebook, my Facebook page, I said, Pope Francis and the prefect of the DDF, the Dicastery, and others are ecclesial positivists. In giving legal support to same-sex relationships, they seem to deny, and here I'm quoting from the Ratzinger document of 2003, that the Church's teaching on marriage and on the complementarity of the sexes is evident to right reason.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's a natural truth about marriage is grounded in the natural law, indeed the order of creation, and being a natural truth means that it is knowable through natural reason.
Yeah, it's not a dictate of the will.
Well,
you can't
the will of the church, for that matter. It's not grounded in church law.
Yeah,
the church teaches it, affirms it to be the case, just like Fernandez and so on. They affirm it, but it seems to me they're legal positivists because they're not talking about this teaching as being grounded in the natural law, creation, and so on.
In the essence of things, right?
You would be a legal positivist if you thought that the reason why we have natural rights, inalienable rights, is because of the Constitution. No.
Right.
The Constitution secures the rights we already have as human beings.
Right. There's an ontological base
Yeah, exactly. It's not just
law.
that we have rights because the Constitution recognizes them.
Not just
The
a product of
Declaration
the
of
human
Independence
will.
says.
Right. Yeah,
So
that's good.
similarly, the church
Bad.
doesn't make it true that sexual differentiation is a fundamental prerequisite for the two to become one flesh. Rather, she affirms that truth grounded in the objective natural law as an expression of, I'm quoting John Paul here from Veritatis Splendor, it's an expression of divine wisdom, he says, by submitting to the law, the objective natural law, the Pope says, freedom submits to the truth of creation. In short, this 2003 document by the CDS prefect, then Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, urges, he says, that it is a duty to clearly and emphatically oppose the legal recognition of homosexual unions, particularly where they have been given the legal status and rights belonging to marriage. So,
yeah,
it seems to me, here's the other, remember the reaction, all the African bishops opposed this document.
Got some quotes from Cardinal Sarah here that
Yeah.
Cardinal Sarah, for those who don't know, was the head of the Dicastery for worship. He's not anymore, but he was. I don't know what the dates on that were, but he responded rather quickly.
He was the prefect. He was appointed by John Paul II. No, by Benedict XVI. So Benedict was, 2005 to 2013, so like 8 years, and then he stayed. Even when Francis came, he stayed for a few more years. But because who knows? He always tried to be faithful, but I think he opposed the whole elimination of what Benedict had called the extraordinary rite. So that's the traditional Latin Mass.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so somebody else was appointed. I don't know. Although, in my view, and I know the Pope explainers, the hyper-papalists will hate me for saying this, but in my view, the people the Pope surrounds himself with, those that he appoints in his position.
Well, this is something that I was just, when I was doing an interview on this, I was thinking about, where was the challenge to the church's teaching coming from 100 years ago? It was coming from the scientific positivists, right? And the challenges were all to the metaphysical,
Right.
more abstract doctrines of the church, miracles, even just, the existence of God, nature of miracles,
right?
What we'd call, in simple terms, the supernatural aspects of our faith. But that the natural sciences really don't have what I call the epistemic hegemony in the culture anymore.
Right.
It's really the social sciences now. Since the 60s in the West. It's the social sciences who are even dictating to the natural sciences how the project of the natural sciences should occur. So everything's very anthropocentric now. Right. We're not actually asking questions like, we're seeing churches that will affirm God, the existence of God, the Trinity, miracles. They have no problem with supernatural. But if you ask the question, what is a human being?
Right. What is a woman?
What is a woman? It's like, let's turn to the social sciences. Let's turn to Foucault and the heirs of Foucault to tell us about what we are as opposed to the word of God. And I wonder, like, the infiltration of the social sciences, and we've talked about the Frankfurt School and the critical theorists before,
right,
on the church. And now it's like, oh, well, these are the experts on anthropology, on theological anthropology. That's where we have to go to now,
right,
to get our sense of ourselves,
right,
and how this has influenced the Vatican. I don't know who.
Well, no, I agree that
but,
here's my what I always say is, you have to distinguish between the church's teaching, understanding what the normative status of that teaching is, understand the normative in the sense also that it's infallible teaching, infallible referring to the fact the church doesn't make it infallible. Infallibility has to do with ascribing the highest degree of certainty to a proposition that we know to be true. So the proposition that Jesus himself affirms, he refers us to the creation text of, as we said earlier, of Genesis 1:27 and Genesis 2:24, though the proposition that God created man in his image, male and female, he created them. Well, the church has a realist view of truth.
Yep.
That assertion is true because what is asserted there is in fact the case about objective reality.
It's a correspondence theory of truth. It corresponds to the way God has designed the universe.
True in an objective sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just reference Robert Gagnon's book,
right.
The Bible and Homosexual Practices, which I'm almost
a great book and
finished on that. For those who need to get into the textual details.
Yeah, that's right. And he of course agrees that sexual differentiation is a fundamental prerequisite for the two to become one flesh. He argues, of course, that this is fundamental to sexual ethics, to conjugal ethics, etc., etc. But I want to distinguish between what the church teaches and how we understand that, because these people, even if they're cardinals and they make claims, they about how we need to read the scriptures and what the status of scriptural teaching was and all that, and they want to do away with all. It just seems to me that it's flawed. It's flawed even when they use the term it's development. This is just development.
Well, I remember you turned me on to a book that I read and by a Roman Catholic. Well, she was. I think she's. I don't know if she, but that Margaret Farley.
Yeah.
What was the title of her book? Sexual.
Just Love. It's called.
Just Love.
And that's a terrible book.
And
I just wrote. Did I send you I wrote an article that's coming out in a volume on her and John Paul II and pre-papal writings of John Paul II, of Karl Wojtyła.
Yeah, but I'm sure she's very popular amongst the James Martin crowds.
Oh, of course,
out of the world.
No, of course.
And I mean, she opens up that book basically with this statement that this kind of now we know-ism,
right,
kind of statement, and she's referencing Foucault throughout the book.
No.
And that she makes this claim: we can never go back to a traditional understanding of sexual ethics,
right,
and she said, and everything else.
Right.
It's this sort of Hegelian kind of view of reality that God is sort of progressing along with us.
Right.
And this
she's a historicist, and so she denies the enduring validity of truth, and I try to deal with that. She's also an anti-realist because ultimately she doesn't think that your assertions can be.
Most of these people are radical nominalists as well.
So.
Their philosophical presuppositions are there.
Right.
As the damage.
So if we come back to the documents, you can find the teaching there of the church on marriage and all that.
It is in there. I want to make that clear.
It's in there. It's in there. They're not denying, they're not saying, but as I just tried to explain, they're in my view, they are ecclesial positivists.
Yeah.
Because they're not, and hence they're fideists, because they don't argue like Ratzinger did in that 2003 document that the two in one flesh union, a man and a woman, is a naturally knowable truth, and so it's known by right reason, and so you can engage in an argument about the truth of that proposition. They flirt with some kind of fideism, and positivism usually is connected to that. Even though I agree that they're not challenging the doctrine as such now, since they're ecclesial positivists in my view, and they don't think it's a naturally knowable truth, known by natural reason, etc., it's kind of like in my view a slippery slope, because all of these people who want to change the teaching, like the Cardinal of Luxembourg and
I hear the German bishops
and the
constantly
German bishops, you see, they
as the ones
think
who are pushing the agenda.
They think that these things can change. See, they don't distinguish between development and change. They think these things can change, you see.
Let me read a quote
that
this is okay, because we've also talked, I mean, what we're talking about again in just a different way is this, and we talked about in the last part, is this attempt to sort of segregate propositional claims from pastoral care,
right,
from application,
right,
as if the two shall never meet, right?
Right.
Here's a quote that I found in the National Catholic Reporter, which maybe that's a fairly liberal. That's a liberal.
They're about as
liberal as you can get. Okay.
Oh, you can't get any more liberal.
This was a December 20th article by Michael Sean Winters.
Oh yeah, well he's
this will just highlight.
He's a hyper-papalist.
Okay.
But on the other side of things,
But on the other side. So this will highlight, I think, for the audience, how these people are thinking about Francis and this agenda and about truth, ultimately.
Right.
He says, quote, Michael Sean Winters, quote, "The shift Francis intends is at once less exact and more profound than a doctrinal shift. What Francis has been trying to achieve for many years is to relocate the place of doctrine within the magisterium of the church, specifically to insist that doctrine serves the good of souls, not the other way around." Now, there's a sense that this is true, but listen to where he goes with this. He says, "Instead of seeing the Pope's responsibility as confined to the articulation of clearly thought out statements of what the church does and does not believe, Francis wants the teaching office to prioritize its own pastoral application above doctrinal clarity." Quote, "How will this affect real people?" End quote, Francis asks before he puts pen to paper. End quote, Michael Sean Winters. Now, anytime I see this idea that doctrinal clarity is not that important.
No.
It's like, why is clarity not important?
Right.
Why shouldn't doctrinal clarity be exactly what you're aiming for, so that you can apply things to people properly, well, and for their spiritual health benefit?
These people,
and this is this historicist, I think.
It's historicist. It's undergirded by historicism, by a kind of a pragmatism, and there is, in fact, if not an outright denial of dogma, and in a realist sense that dogma, the assertions made there are true if in fact they correspond to reality.
True, regardless of place, time, culture.
Right. No, they don't believe that. They don't believe that. And I don't even think Francis believes that. But because of his view of truth, as I've talked about before. No, I think there's an underlying historicism, so it denies the enduring validity of truth. It doesn't deny that you need to make propositional assertions, but it's like the person who says, yes, the Nicene Creed or Chalcedon. Yes, we made those assertions were made, but those assertions are relative to the time in which they were made,
relative to the people writing them,
exactly,
the culture, the language,
and so on and so on.
Right, exactly,
and so on and so on. And so the fact is, you have a kind of a historicism, you have a pragmatism, you have an anti-dogmatic inclination, such that you think, you relativize the place of dogma, because you don't think that it really has anything to do with truth, you see, in a realist sense.
Yeah.
But this is why I say all of these things, are inherent in the Catholic tradition, and so my prayer is that the next Pope will clear all this up, because
Yeah, bring some things back into
none of this
order.
will stand. Like even the whole matter about capital punishment,
Right.
I don't think it'll stand. So no, and I agree. That National Catholic Reporter, of course, they're just salivating, but they've been salivating for 11 years now, thinking that the Pope was just going to wake up one morning and say, we're going to ordain women, we're going to ordain women deacons.
Yeah, right. I mean,
we're going to change marriage and so on and so on.
Yeah.
But no, none of that has happened. And so then the question becomes whether, you change the reception of the dogma of marriage, that it's a two in one flesh union between a man and a woman. You change that by, a sort of a multi-pronged attack. You have those people then who come out and say, oh, we know better now. Remember Gagnon deals with, St. Paul, he didn't know about committed covenantal same-sex relations and so on. He didn't have the understanding of the homosexuality as an inherent condition and all of that stuff. Now, all of that stuff, it seems to me, is wrong. It's contentious. It's controverted. It's certainly not the church's teaching. All you have to do is, and that's why they want to get rid of it. All you have to do is go read in the third part of the Catechism, the moral life in Christ, and its reflections on the sixth commandment, which begin with Genesis 1:27 and Genesis 2:24.
Yeah.
So clearly, the church thinks that the anthropology here is fundamental to the sexual ethics, the conjugal ethics, to discussing offenses against chastity. Homosexual love. I honestly, I didn't even want to talk about this the other day in one of my classes, and I just said, I'm just flabbergasted that the Pope could say that you have to give legal. It's one thing to say, let's tolerate homosexual relationships, etc. It's another thing to say, as Ratzinger said in that 2003 document, it's another thing to be an advocate for it.
Yeah.
And it's another thing then to say that there's giving legal equivalence to. I don't know where the Pope is on that.
And this is something like where, we think of like how then after Fiducia Supplicans came out and it starts to get exploited by people like James Martin, you get the the photos that you can put up all over the place of the same-sex couple,
which violates what the document actually says.
But here's the thing, and that's the thing, is like, but we know that there's not going to be any church discipline.
No, well, that's
right. There's not going to be any church discipline.
No, the Pope has invited, has taken photos with Martin.
So this is going to be like you start doing things, practices,
right?
Where you can always fall back on, because this is being done in a lot of these big evangelical churches,
right?
Where the teaching, the abstract teaching hasn't changed, but you're doing things that look as if it has been changed.
Right.
And what you do, you're just slowly manipulating the congregation.
Right.
Then just forget the teaching. We don't even think about it anymore, because what we're seeing in front of us is what we're taking in as reality. It's you're taking in these concrete things that are happening in front of you, which allows you then to assume that it must be okay. And I tell you what was interesting, there was Bill Tye for Touchstone.
Yeah.
So in the edition of Touchstone with Hans Boersma's lead article, to show it here, the fall
of Rome.
Each of the editors also responded to Fiducia Supplicans, and Bill Tye, who I've met once, he made an interesting observation about something that Chris Christie then said. Because Chris Christie, I guess, grew up Catholic, and, and he's not like a faithful or devout Catholic.
No.
But he was, before Fiducia Supplicans came out, Christie had made statements where he was not on board personally with same-sex marriage, because he grew up sort of in a, a rough and tough a place in New Jersey,
Right,
and
right,
this
right,
was against sort of that general Catholic upbringing that
right.
there's something wrong and disordered about same-sex marriages. But
Relations and
then
so on, yeah.
after Fiducia Supplicans,
Oh, yeah, I know.
Christie comes out and says, now I can feel comfortable
It's an emotional
about
reaction.
accepting same-sex unions because the Pope was basically blessed off on it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this is where Ty's relating this to Jesus is saying of creating a stumbling block for the little ones.
Right.
Amongst the, woe to him who creates a stumbling block for and he was treating Christie as sort of like, yeah, Christie doesn't know the Bible. He does,
No, he doesn't know anything.
But was saying, Ty was saying it was like a little one in this sense of somebody who's kind of naive about things. But now that Fiducia Supplicans has come out, he can go along with the culture.
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting point because there's going to be a lot of people like that who are just sort of culturally Catholic. They grew up this way. They have maybe a genuine sense there's something wrong with same-sex unions. But now with Fiducia Supplicans, okay, I can go along with what the culture is saying is true.
Right.
So
you can find many Christians like that, not just Catholics. Like
no, I mean across the board, right? So
right.
It's Andy
But
Stanley.
here's a couple of other things.
Yeah.
So we went from we're not blessing unions. We're blessing couples. So we know that there's no there's no distinction there, because in blessing a couple, you're blessing those that belong to the union. But remember, I said a couple is a we. When you get to the point where you describe yourself as a couple, that means you're talking about us, we. There's reciprocity and so on. And then they began to say, oh no, it's not even couples. We're just blessing individuals. They said. This is why I often said to people, the document dies the death of 1,000 qualifications, you see. So you get the blessings, blessing individuals, and which is not true, because the document doesn't say that. It does say blessings of couples in part 3 of Fiducia Supplicans. It says blessing of couples in irregular situations and of couples of the same sex. So I would say, firstly, that the claim that two individuals the assumption is, when I say in an adulterous or homosexual relationship, so in a spiritually and morally problematic relationship, it can't be irregular. That's a euphemism.
Yeah.
Or being
what some people have brought up the point, what if some guy walks up there with his daughter? I mean, a regular situation. Well, a regular is like, there could be all kinds of irregular situations. And then, it raises the question of what is that like for the priest who's actually standing there then?
Since the Pope, this is already in Amoris Laetitia, he says in paragraph 311, he says, at times we find it hard to make room for God's unconditional love in our pastoral activity, he says. We put so many conditions on mercy that we empty it of its concrete meaning and real significance. That is the worst way of watering down the gospel. It is true, for example, that mercy does not exclude justice and truth, but first and foremost, we have to say that mercy is the fullness of justice and the most radiant manifestation of God's truth. This is all word salad there. But the fact is, it's what it says later on, that the prefect said. And he says it again in the clarification, that you're not allowed to attach any conditions for this person to receive a blessing. You can't do any kind. It's also a red herring to say that, moral perfection isn't required. Well, nobody thinks that.
Yeah.
So, but the point is that in the first place, as I said, part 3 of FS says the blessing of couples. It doesn't say blessing of individuals. And the English translation erroneously uses the word individuals. This is from Father Murray's interview, for the Italian costoro, which means they, them. In a brief prayer preceding the spontaneous blessing, the ordained minister could ask that the individuals have peace. The individuals. So it's more than one. The other language versions published by the Holy See translate Cursora accurately. The blessing is given to them, not to individuals. Whatever may be the reason for this mistake, this wrong translation cannot be the basis of any plausible claim that the author of Fiducia Supplicans did not intend to authorize the blessing of couples, just of individuals. And then it goes on to where we began. So I would say unions, couples, there's no distinction. It's a distinction without a difference. Right. It's double talk, double speak.
Yeah.
And then because people lost their minds intellectually, it wasn't just, it's so condescending to think that the only reason people are against this is because you're emotionally reacting, or condescending with the African bishops. I'm not just thinking of Sarah, but the whole African Episcopal Conference who rejected it, as if somehow it's just a cultural matter.
Yeah. And their culture needs to catch up.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, this is, I'm talking to Ian Paul. This is in the Anglican Church, because Ian Paul was a New Testament scholar, and he was debating some progressive Anglicans at Oxford Union. And he was telling me that, yeah, there are these progressive Anglicans that think that Africa needs to be re-evangelized.
Right.
Well, they're behind the times.
They're behind the times, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the same thing there. It is condescending, but to me, having studied a little bit about, or at least having read like Jacques Ellul's treatment of propaganda in his classic book, Propaganda, this is a tactic. This is this is how you disarm your political foe. You present them a certain way as irrational,
Oh, they're backwards. And in fact, the African bishops called it an instance of cultural imperialism. What the Pope,
Western intellectual imperialism.
What Francis calls ideological colonization, which is a good term to use. The Americans and others, trying to impose on African nations, the sexual revolution, as it were.
Sexual revolution, right?
All of that.
Yeah.
So
well, look, I mean, I want to maybe start to wrap up with with the pastoral question, because, and I'm going to read what I think was a very incisive point by Hans Boersma in his article, and maybe we'll finish with this, because I mean, I know faithful evangelical Christians who do wrestle with same-sex attraction and have committed themselves to a life of celibacy. And with regards to people in that,
and they've been thrown under the bus.
This is what Hans Boersma says. This is in his article, The Fall of Rome, and the subtitle of this, or the heading, is Pastoral Cruelty. And he says this, he says, quote, "We must reflect upon the pastoral cruelty involved," referring to Fiducia Supplicans, "to someone trying to remain faithful in his struggles with same-sex attractions. The Pope's statement must feel like a punch to the gut. How futile his moral struggle has been, his efforts to resist sexual temptation day in and day out, when he could instead have found himself a partner and gone off to his priest for a blessing."
Right. It's true.
But
of course, that doesn't fall. Of course, the conclusion is wrong. Because that's not in the document.
Right.
You have, of course, utterly liberal priests and so on that would try to provide a justification for it, but the document itself explicitly rejects that.
Right. And I think he knows that, but he's kind of, I think he's getting to pastoral, where the more this gets pushed in that direction, the more the person who is, really has to bear down and say, I'm firmly committed to Christ, the Word of God, and the infallible teaching of the church, regardless of what I hear and see sort of maybe coming through these other channels in the Vatican. And that's that just makes the battle, I think, that much more difficult for the faithful Catholic, or,
it's true.
Yeah,
it's true. There's no question that regardless of the literal sense of the text, what the text actually states, there'll be people who twist it, and because whatever one makes of it, I don't agree with Fiducia Supplicans, but they're trying to hold on to the doctrinal and the pastoral, but eventually since the approach of Francis and of Cardinal Fernandez is a pragmatic approach, and there's a kind of an anti-dogmatic tendency, and there's a sort of a built-in historicism and a kind of a anti-realism about doctrinal and the way the scriptures are read, and so on and so on. Again, this document, in my view, was totally unessential.
Yeah.
As Laudario said, a person struggling with same-sex attraction, an individual, knocks on your door and asks to come and talk to you about his struggle with same-sex attraction, what Hans is talking about. And after the conversation, the individual struggling, penitent, and so on, asks for a blessing because he wants to make choices worthy of the calling that we've received in Christ. He wants to live the Christian life. He wants to be faithful,
desiring the grace of God to strengthen him for the sake of holiness.
He doesn't describe himself as a gay man or as it's same-sex attraction. He's an individual, a human being, and so on.
Yeah.
But that's,
which also, by the way, then it doesn't segregate the person with same-sex attraction off from everybody else who's struggling with sin.
Well,
right?
But
we're not in different categories.
In my view, there you have to be careful, because there's the Pope saying, wrongly in my judgment, he said, all those people who get worked up about blessing homosexuals, but they're not worried about, blessing mafioso types, who are embezzling money and blah, blah, blah. So it seems to me, yes, of course, all sin is wrong, but I don't accept an egalitarian view of sin, as if all sin is equal in that sense, as to its content, as to the object of the sin.
Yeah, no, right. I mean, there are different kinds of sin, right?
There are. I mean, even the distinction between mortal and venial, you can find in Protestant.
Sure. There are weightier matters of the law.
Exactly. So it seems to me that this is a weightier matter. Homosexuality, transgenderism, these are weightier matters because you're denying the truth of creation.
Right. No, there is and I think Gagnon makes this point, and it is true. There is a difference between the adulterer who is, or the person who is cohabitating with somebody of the opposite sex, which is still, sinful. I'm not saying it's not sinful, but there's an ontological naturalness and fittingness to that relationship.
A man being attracted to a woman, even lusting after a woman, is, even if lust is a sin, the fact is, for the man to be attracted to the woman is something normal.
Right.
For a man to be attracted to another man, or for a woman to be attracted to me, it's perverse. We don't say that any longer, but it's perverse. It's as I said, the Catechism says it's an offense against chastity. Homosexual sexual acts are inherently disordered acts, meaning they can't be ordered to the natural law, can't be ordered to God, and even the inclination is itself disordered. The inclination describes not the person, but it just describes, the condition of the person. So at the end of the day, I just come back to this point. The document is totally unnecessary. Totally unnecessary. I consider it a kind of a pandering to homosexuals, and it opens itself up to the abuse, to the by those priests and bishops and so on who just want to affirm this, who think this is a kind of a stepping stone. And certainly the culture,
which then at the end of the day does no service
no
at
service,
all
no
to
service at all.
the same-sex attracted man or woman.
No, because
None.
because it's not asking.
It's a disservice at the end of the day.
It's not
Total
asking that person to change your life, to repent.
Yeah.
And the fact is, when you have two people, see again, so despite the fact that they say it's about individuals, there's nowhere in the document that it says individuals, an individual. It says individuals, couples, okay. And even though it makes disclaimers about legitimizing the union as such, legitimizing, the sexual acts that occur outside of marriage, all of that is rejected. And when I thought about it more, it just seemed to me they can say all that. The Belgian bishops and even the German bishops would probably say all that doctrinally, it's church law and so on, but they're all ecclesial positivists.
Yeah,
because they don't think that Genesis 1:27 and Genesis 2 Genesis 1 and 2:24 is grounded in the order of creation.
Yeah.
They're not realists. They're pragmatists. They're historicists.
Well, and this is that bigger, philosophical fight, and the church always capitulates to some degree or another to the philosophy of the day.
Well, again, I distinguish between what's normative in the church and then what, some of these the responses and reactions and capitulation of some in the church. But I always then refer back to what the church actually teaching and what its most its illustrious predecessors, John Paul II and Benedict XVI, they were realists. They were philosophical.
Protestants felt much more comfortable with.
Of course, because
we agreed on truth.
Because unfortunately, even if you can say, Francis does some good things and so on, the fact is the philosophical and theological basis of what he does is in my view unfortunate. I know, it's a tough thing, but hope springs eternal. I don't I just say, look, we pray for a new pope that actually understands the teachings of the church and doesn't accept this kind of dualism between doctrine and pastoral practice, and understands that and in fact the Catechism says that dogma is actually liberating. The truth of dogma is actually liberating. It lights our path, it says, Unfortunately, even though the Pope isn't anti-dogmatic, he does minimize the significance of dogma, because he has a pragmatic, I would say even a historicist vision of these things.
Right.
So I side with Father Murray and others who say that Fiducia Supplicans should be revoked. I don't believe that'll happen while Francis is Pope, or while what's his name Fernandez is the prefect. But
maybe the next.
Well,
next papacy round.
I think the next conclave of cardinals will say, "Oh my goodness, there's been a kind of a studied, systematic. I put it down, a systematic ambiguity in these things,
Right.
And it doesn't help to say, oh, but they don't deny the doctrine. No, they don't deny the doctrine. Why is that? Anyway, it's all we should probably end right now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Ed. I mean,
Yeah, thank you.
so very clarifying for
Yeah.
our audience, and
Yeah.
God bless you, and
God
we look
bless you,
forward to
and let
doing
me know when you put it up, okay?
I will. All right.
Thank you.
brother.
Thank you, brother. Take care.